Hello, historians. Today we're going to talk about how the Civil War impacted different groups of people. You should, the sheet, make a chart that is like on the sheet if you can't print it or have it up and type on it or write on it if you know how to do that on your computer. But you're going to fill out information about the different groups of people. I would put maybe 2 facts in each category of people. So, the Civil War had a profound impact on the United States. As a result of the war, the Union was preserved, so the United States was kept together. The slaves were freed. The rights of states to secede was decided by force of arms to be null and void. So those states that seceded, that is not accurate anymore. Doesn't count. It's like it doesn't count. The validity of elections was upheld. So Lincoln's election of 1860 was upheld. In 1864, the physical environment of the North was affected very little by the war since only a few battles were fought there. However, the South was devastated. Entire cities were burned and plantations were destroyed. Thousands of acres of farmland were ruined, and the fields were left unplanted and useless in the absence of slave labor to plant and harvest the cash crops. And this is a ruined cotton mill. This is the Potter House, and this was the ruins in Charleston. The impact of the war on the soldiers depended upon who you were and where you came from. Young men from both sides enlisted or were drafted into the service. The wealthy were often able to pay for someone else to take their place. In the South, planters were exempt from service if they owned over 20 slaves. For all soldiers, the war was at first an adventure but soon became a challenge of endurance and survival. Soldiers endured a long, difficult, and bloody war, often with little food or clean water. Over 600,000 men on both sides died, and over 1,100,000 soldiers were injured, and many lost limbs. This is a Confederate soldier cemetery, and this was a Virginia Field hospital where there were injuries. So I would definitely put that soldiers on both sides could see their friends died. Many died themselves or lost limbs. In both regions, women were left in charge of their homes and farms or businesses while the men were away fighting. In the North, women served as nurses or worked in factories during the war. Others rolled bandages or knitted socks at home to send to the soldiers. In the South, women were left to manage their families and continue operating the farms and plantations. They were also served as nurses. Because so many men died in the war, many women had to continue managing their families after the war during the difficult period of rebuilding. So just on the women part, I would put that they were left in charge. They could be nurses. Those are the most important ones. During the war, some African American slaves ran away from plantations and others continued to work the fields and just waited. After the Emancipation Proclamation, male African Americans were allowed to join the Union Army. Immediately after the war, many former slaves left plantations looking for loved ones sold away or simply leaving because freedom meant now they have the ability to leave. Few freed men actually went all the way to the north. Most soon returned to the areas that they knew. Some even returned to their old plantations, where many found work as sharecroppers, which we'll talk about in the next unit. African Americans reconstructed their families, created their own communities, participated in politics, and sought an education that had not been denied to them as slaves. The civilian population of the North and the South had both very different experiences of the war, though opposition occurred on both sides. So civilians are people who are not in fighting on the battlefield, just regular people, mostly women, but some men who were maybe too old to fight or got exempt because they paid or they had 20 or more slaves. In the North, the civilian population of the North did not suffer from lack of food and supplies. They had what they needed. The war prompted the growth of businesses as the government granted contracts for military supplies and issued paper money, kept most of its value after the war. Although immigration slowed as a result of the war, factories continue to be able to produce. So mostly the North civilians, not a problem. That's what I would put. Did not suffer much in the North. But in the South, the civilian population suffered from lack of food and supplies because of the blockade and the disruption of agriculture, which led to bread riots in some places. Um, Also, because their farms were completely destroyed from Sherman's march, so they weren't able to grow their food again. The paper money issued by the Confederacy was worthless after the war ended, with the government surrender, and the slaves were freed, and planters lost a large portion of their wealth as well as their labor force. So, those were some important things to note. On your chart, in the post war period, both sides tried to recover from the devastating impact of the war, but the divisions of war will continue into the Reconstruction period. Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction, issued before the surrender of Appomattox, was a lenient one because he wanted the South to surrender. However, Lincoln may have changed his plan if he had not been assassinated. The insistence of Southern governments in continuing to keep their African American populations in a state of subservience through the Black Codes led to a military Reconstruction plan. This plan protected the rights of the freedmen through the 14th and 15th Amendments, but continued the division of war. The war was over, but the battle was not won. And we're going to talk more about Reconstruction in our next unit.